Mr. Glen Buckley via video conference. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Hello there, my name's Glen Buckley. I'm appearing in the capacity as a private individual and somebody that's spent 25 years working in the aviation industry.
Thank you, and I invite you to make a brief opening statement before the committee asks questions. Do you wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, I'd like to take advantage of that, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. First off, I realise this isn't a 21st birthday speech, so this is something somewhat more substantial than that, but I would like to take the opportunity to thank some people, and particularly yourself, Senator Susan McDonald. I realise these sort of issues aren't things that attract a lot of votes in your electorate, so they're bigger picture things that take ethics and integrity, so I want to thank you for that. And to Senator Glenn Sturl, you won't remember me. Can you hear me there, sir? Okay, I don't think you remember me, but I came into your office about 2 years ago with another aviation gentleman, and you spent a lot of time taking me around Parliament and spending a lot of time with me. And you may recall I came home, I had a very, very inspirational day, so I have a lot of trust and confidence in you. I've met you, so thank you for being on board today. Thank you. I just want to thank about this, but I really need to thank a couple of platforms, P. Prune, Auntie Prue, a couple of organisations that are behind me. All of the people that came together, established a crowdfunding page, contributed to that crowdfunding page, and probably more important than the financial contributions they made, the comments that they made. They meant a lot to me. And all my friends, just everybody in the general aviation industry that stood up to get behind me. As you may be aware, I've got a forum going that's had close to 700,000 views, 1,500 comments, and the support's been exceptional. And I also want to apologise. I want to actually apologise to all of the people that have been impacted to the supplier, the business, the value, my customers, my family, my parents, my children, my kids' school, and everybody's been impacted about the story that I'm about to tell you. Everything I say today is absolutely truthful, okay? And I can support everything I say in writing. This is the truth. This is about intent. If you ask me a question, I'll answer in the intent that you want me to answer. I won't try and cover anything up, and I'll be truthful. I understand that this privilege afforded to me today gives me access to parliamentary privilege, and I'm somewhat protected from the comments that I say. I don't want that protection. I want to send a very clear message to Mr. Carmody, the CEO of CASA. I am waiving my right to any sort of parliamentary privilege to give my story the credibility that it deserves. You are welcome to initiate any legal action against me at the conclusion of this.
Mr. Buckley, you don't need to go down that path. This is a Senate inquiry. Just leave it as it is and you continue with your evidence. Thank you.
Okay. All right. While I appreciate the diversity, this is a prepared statement, I want to say it's fairly brief. While I appreciate the diversity of the experience before me, I cannot reasonably expect you to be subject matter experts on flight training and aviation safety matters. Irrespective of that, you will have an appreciation of the importance of a productive relationship between the regulator and the industry that it is regulating, be that aviation or trucking or any other industry. A relationship of mutual respect, trust and good intention will irrefutably enhance good safety outcomes. If the culture of Australia's National Aviation Safety Regulator, CASA, could be demonstrated to be unsafe, that it did not act in good faith, did not follow clearly stipulated procedures, denied individuals their rights under administrative law, procedural fairness and natural justice. If it could be proven that CASA had done this to many individuals and small business owners within Australia, not just me. If it could be proven that those actions were unlawful and couldn't be justified on the basis of any desired safety outcome. If it could be proven that those actions cost businesses and jobs. If it could be proven that CASA acted vindictively and vexatiously, then you would be compelled to act, as you will be. And I'm calling on both of you at the end of this. Before I proceed, I want to be perfectly clear, and Mr. Carmody will present before you shortly, and I put the question to him. Clearly outline any safety case for the action that you took against me, clearly outline any regulatory breaches. I'll talk to you about the business of what APTA was. CASA introduced a regulatory change called Part 61, Part 141 and Part 142. It came in a decade behind schedule, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, and was uniformly rejected by the industry, and CASA themselves will admit the failure of it. What it did was it massively increased the cost of running a flying school. The regulatory burden was very, very high. In fact, the regulations meant all flying schools in Australia had to close down in 3 years unless they complied with the regulations. I approached CASA and I put in a concept that I was going to call the Australian Pilot Training Alliance. I was going to take my existing flying school, Melbourne Flight Training, morph it into the Australian Pilot Training Alliance. It was a flying school, it was a registered training organisation and had CRICOS approval to train overseas students. In conjunction with 10 CASA personnel, over 2 years, at an investment by me of many hundreds of thousands of dollars, I built APTA. It was fully approved by CASA. CASA recommended members to join APTA. The best analogy I can give is that APTA is probably somewhat like IGAs to the supermarket industry. I took all the powerful approvals that I had in my school of 10 years and I took those approvals, put them up the top, and it provided the opportunity for 10 schools to join underneath. I had full accountability for the entire operation. As I say, CASA helped me design it. They approved bases to operate under it, and that business operated. Then on the 23rd of October 2018, with absolutely no warning at all, not on the basis of any regulatory breaches, not on the basis of safety, Mr. Jonathan Alec, the Executive Manager of Legal, International and Regulatory Affairs at CASA, had a change of mind. He'll be appearing before you shortly. Ask him what the regulatory support of what he did to me was. There is nothing. He has no rules. The Civil Aviation Act itself requires CASA, one of the functions of CASA is to provide clear and concise aviation safety standards. I expect Mr. Jonathan Alec before you shortly to be able to show you the rules that were broken. There were none. Their conduct was vindictive and vexatious. I just want to talk briefly about, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I just want to talk about what APTA did for flying schools in regional areas of Victoria. The cost of running a flying school has gone through the roof. I felt it in my own flying school. So this solution was designed, consider an aero club. It's made up of the local insurance broker and the local farmer, shop owners and local people come together in a rural aero club to enjoy flying together. It's an important part of these communities. These aero clubs can't keep up with the CASA legislative compliance, the constant changes, the restrictions. It's too burdensome for them. They want to be running aero clubs and having competition days and flyaways and getting around to the bar at night time and having a chat. That's what APTA was supposed to give them. So CASA should have supported this. I was going to take all the compliance, the safety, all the responsibility for the operation and let them go about running their aero clubs. APTA was very well intentioned. It was a very, very big investment. And ultimately, it's cost me my house. The investment was so big. For the first time, CASA will, Mr. Carmody will get up later on and he will say, CASA has to assure themselves of good governance. Well, I'll say to you, Mr. Carmody, APTA was the first organisation in Australia, not just flying schools, the first organisation in Australia, aviation company, to give CASA full 24/7 access to every single aspect of the business. The staff training, the students' files, the flight and duty, predictive maintenance, communications between the staff. They had access to the whole system. The system was designed with a management structure of schools that do 10 times the volume of flight. It was a registered training organisation subjected to frequent audits. So it was a very, very high calibre organisation, a big investment with industry-leading personnel. Now, what did CASA do to me? Okay, before I start this, I want to talk about a gentleman called Bruce Rhodes briefly, very briefly. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Bruce Rhodes was a gentleman whose company was involved in an aviation accident. Unfortunately, he fought diligently to protect his name and his reputation, as I am, and unfortunately he acquired cancer. And he went to his grave before he had the chance to clear his name. And I apologise to his family if this brings them any discomfort because I haven't had the opportunity to seek their approval to tell you this story. But the ABC, the 7:30 report, did an investigation into the conduct of the CASA personnel. So he went to his grave not being able to defend himself. I don't know about the decisions you made in the aeroplane on the day. I wasn't there. It's not up to me to judge. You fly yourself, Senator Susan McDonald. Constant decision making. So I can't judge his decisions. To me, they seem to be decisions possibly somewhat similar to what I would have made. What I can say to you for Bruce Rhodes, who has now passed away, and for his family, I can assure you that in the case of him, CASA came up with they reverse engineered the process. They did it to me. They work out what they want and they work backwards. He was denied breached under administrative law, decide natural justice, procedural fairness. He wasn't given these things. He went to his grave with his reputation in tatters, and I'm not letting it happen to me. So what did CASA do to me? Okay, to simplify this story, we don't have a lot of time, I appreciate. CASA did three things to me. The first stage they did overnight, for no reason at all, changed their opinion, came in and placed my entire business on 7 days' notice of operations. That's classified as a cancellation, variation, or a suspension of their operator certificate. They have very strict procedures and protocols that they need to follow to take such substantive action. Bear in mind, this is not on safety ground. They're complete reverse. They denied me my privileges under administrative law, and they put restrictions on my ability to trade for a staggering 8 months. I couldn't take revenue. We've just been through this with coronavirus. We know what it does to businesses. No one was going to join a school that only had 7 days certainty of operation in the future. Consider what that does to staff, what that does to employees, what that does to customers, what that does to suppliers. Like, my parents stepped in so I could avoid redundancies with those restrictions placed on my ability to trade. My parents stepped in for 8 months and funded the staff salaries to the tune of $300,000 so that I didn't have to make anybody redundant. At the end of the 8 months, exhausted of funds and too embarrassed to go back to my parents, I sold that business for 5% of what it was worth. That was stage one. Stage two, I retained my existing flying school called Melbourne Flight Training. CASA told me that I had to, this is something that they don't have. This was again their opinion. This isn't defined. I came up with something called direct operational control, and they required me to transfer my flying school, my staff, students, resources, and financial control. There's no basis in this administrative law over to the new owners of APTA that I sold the business for. That left me with the debts and leases on photocopying equipment, et cetera, with no revenue. I then, in the third stage, obtained employment in the industry and continued to defend my reputation on P-Prune and Anti-Prue until CASA sent a letter to my employer saying that my position was untenable based on comments that I was making publicly. I was terminated that day. I spent 8 months unemployed, dealing with a very depressive state, and have recently returned to the workforce outside of the aviation industry. Now, is there any questions at this stage? Are you happy for me to continue?
I think keep going, and there will be questions at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. I will keep going. I'm going to read from a written statement here. Okay. I just want to talk about, so I'm going to briefly just go into the impact of what the CASA action has done to me, just to make sure it's very clear. I've lost my home, I've lost my business, I've lost my job, I've lost my reputation. My parents have lost $300,000 supporting staff salaries. My daughter's education at university, in a remote university, has been impacted. My son, who is doing his VCE, I am unable to pay his school fees. The school has had me declared bankrupt, and that will be activated in February. I have no money. I have been left absolutely, completely destitute, and at 56 years of age have no hope of ever rebuilding my life once I've been declared bankrupt. I have nothing left. Whilst I'm no lawyer, I have done extensive research over the last 2 years that this has been going on into the definition of misfeasance in public office and negligent misstatement. I've had the opportunity to discuss this matter with several legal firms to ensure my understanding is correct. First, and on the subject of misfeasance in public office. Justin Dean in the High Court determined misfeasance in public office requires an intentional but invalid or unauthorised act to have been committed by a public officer in the purported discharge of their public duties which causes a loss to a person. It requires that the person committing the act did so deliberately. We're going to come back to that. That's going to become very important for some allegations I'm shortly to make. Second, and on the subject of negligent misstatement. Negligent misstatement is information provided but is inaccurate or misleading. It requires that a legal duty must be recognised and requires a certain standard of conduct to protect against foreseeable risk, and that there was a breach of that duty by failing to meet the requisite standard of care. That the party receiving that advice has suffered material injury as a result of that breach. It requires that the speaker of the information, CASA, realises that they are being trusted and that it is reasonable for the party receiving the information to act upon the information or advice. So I, here in this forum, am lodging a formal allegation of misfeasance against Mr. Shane Carmody, the CEO of CASA. I'm also lodging to both of you senators a formal allegation of misfeasance against Mr. Jonathan Alec, the Executive Manager of Legal International Regulatory Affairs, and finally, an allegation of misfeasance against Mr. Graham Crawford, the Executive Manager of the Aviation Group. Now, my options. I've been out to industry. Industry crowdfunded $50,000 over a short time of me. If I have to go out to industry and seek crowdfunding to hold these people to account, I will do it. However, Senator Susan McDonald and Senator Glenn Sterle, I have raised those serious allegations against these people. It should not be necessary for me to go out and get equity funding from industry, but I will do so if required. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to give you about 10 topics. I realise we don't have a lot of time. So rather than go over all of the topics, I'm going to give you both a choice of 10 topics. Hit me with one of them, and I'll tell you briefly that story. The topics that I could have a chat to you about is the restrictions on the business's ability to trade, administrative freeze, the limited dates of operation, the contracts issue, the CASA direction to terminate my employment, CASA's use of the aviation rule, or the falsified audit results, or temporary locations procedure, or my allegations they've misled the Ombudsman's office. So I'll give those topics to you again just to jot them down. You can hit me with any of those topics and I will talk to them. And I would like to leave. I want this to be a positive experience. So I do want to leave 10 minutes at the end of it to give you well-intentioned suggestions of how I genuinely believe CASA could be improved. So you could talk to me about the restrictions on the business's ability to trade, the administrative freeze placed on the business, the contracts issue, CASA's direction to terminate my employment, CASA's use of the aviation ruling, my claim about falsified audit results, my temporary locations procedure, or my allegations that members of the CASA senior executive have misled the Commonwealth Ombudsman's office. Over to you two.
Mr. Buckley, thank you. Thank you for appearing. I appreciate that this will be a very emotional presentation for you, given the impact that it's had on you personally and your children and your parents. I want to first ask about when we had budget estimates a couple of weeks ago, I was broadly aware of your issue from industry reports, and I asked a question of Mr. Carmody, and his response was not fulsome. I just want you to respond to that, because I'm just trying to understand. I asked a question of him. He gave me a very narrow answer. Could you comment on what your views are on that?
Okay, now on this matter, I don't want to say that he was untruthful. I want to say that he was deliberately misleading. So you asked him the question, had there been any settlement on my matters, and he focused very much on the settlement issue. Now, I have a number of claims against CASA. There's two claims that I have against CASA. I'm going to call it Part A and Part B. Part A of the claim that I want to address first is the claim about everybody outside of my family who's been affected, the staff that have lost their jobs, the businesses that have closed down, the suppliers that have remained unpaid. That's Part A of my claim. And there's another part of the claim against the conduct of CASA, breaches of administrative law, natural justice and procedural fairness. Mr. Carmody was fully aware of that. The only offer that CASA has made to me, and to be honest, I don't recall getting out because I found it so offensive that I only opened the email once. It was a lot less than $5,000. A lot less than $5,000. My recollection is they offered me a total of about $3,500, somewhere in that vicinity.
I want to ask you about the initial issue, which is that you were establishing I think you described it as an IGA approach for flight training schools.
Mm-hmm.
It has been suggested to me that the issue that was raised was that flight training schools shouldn't be able to use an established SOP and manuals as you have developed with CASA, that you could use them for one business, but it wouldn't be appropriate to use them for multiple businesses. Is that your understanding? Have I got that right?
Look, that would be an argument that perhaps CASA or somebody would potentially put forward. I'd like very much the opportunity to refute that. I mean, got to bear in mind, APTA was designed with CASA over 2 years with 10 CASA personnel as I attended to over 600 CASA requirements. Throughout that, but I've been contacted by an ex-CASA employee today to say that they'll support this contention. They worked side by side with me. We had the most advanced IT system. It was an Australian designed product, as I insisted. We built a very, very high-powered overview system. We put our own staff, my staff would each go and base themselves in the base to make sure the induction was thorough. Okay, we had regular meetings, regular audits. CASA probably does an audit on us twice, once every couple of years. We audited our own organisation on hundreds of occasions over the 2 years. I had a very large safety department, the largest safety department of any organisation in Australia. So no, there was one certificate, one set of procedures. The whole thing was designed to be scalable with input from ex-military personnel, and the structure being that it could grow and reduce in size as was required.
So, putting aside whether or not that was the case, that was the item that you were given 7 days to stop operations.
No, so I said to Susan, I'll just stop you there because no, interestingly enough, no, the letter originally, and I have the letter here, I organised, it was just a request for documents and led me to believe that most likely in 7 days they were going to shut me down. I was issued interim approvals to continue operating throughout the 8-month period until the business couldn't continue any longer.
Right, so the letter asked for production of documents, but it didn't require that you stop.
Well, they used, correct, they did let the business go, but I guess my point is, you can't run a business, any business, the BP, ANZ, bank, be it a flying school, and particularly an education facility, where you've only got 7 days certainty of operations. You can't enrol people in courses.
All right, one of the issues that's been raised by other people who've provided submissions is around consistency in decision making by CASA officials within and across CASA. Would this be a reflection of that kind of lack of consistency, or am I swimming outside the flags to suggest that?
Senator Susan McDonald, I can assure you, as you know, and for the viewers, this isn't a Dorothy Dix question, but that is probably one of the most beautiful questions you could ask me. Okay. I operated so CASA operating what are called certificate management teams. These are small roving groups of CASA personnel consisting of experts on flight training, safety, aircraft maintenance. I operated under a team called CMT2 for a decade. Under the leadership of a gentleman called John Costa, I say his name now because he has retired and he has left CASA, an exceptional person and a very good team. They worked with me to design APTA. Then without warning, I received notification from CASA that I was have a change of oversighting team from a team called CMT2 to CMT3. Now, these two teams don't sit across the country. They sit opposite each other in the same desk. And I have this, as I say, I have the emails. Within 24 hours of being notified of the change from CMT2 to CMT3, I wrote to the CASA region manager and I requested a one-on-one on the record meeting because the new team contained a flight operations inspector, Mr. Brad Lacey, who has a very bad reputation as being somewhat vindictive and vexatious in the Victoria-Tasmania region. So
can I just flag,
yes.
Mr. Buckley, that I am very keen to hear your story, but I'm not a legal expert and I don't want you to wade into anything that's going to get you into difficulties. Suggest perhaps we just leave individual names out of it.
Okay. Okay, so I had a change of oversighting personnel. I went from one team to another team. I requested a meeting with the CASA region manager where I said, I don't want this individual oversighting my business because I think that will bring harm to me and my business. CASA ignored that request. There was the change of CMT to CMT3, and surely enough, that very individual initiated the action against CASA, against me. Interesting.
I'm going to let Senator Stirl ask some questions while I go back through my notes and come back to you. Thank you, Mr. Buckley.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Buckley. Good to see you again.
Cheers.
But on what basis did they give you 7 days notice that they were winding up your business or not going to allow you to operate?
Right, okay. Well, to simplify the matter, they used a document called the Aviation ruling and said that it was, which is a document designed for the charter industry, not for flight training. And that's one of the topics I could talk to in detail. They used a document called the Aviation ruling. The Commonwealth Ombudsman has completed phase 1 of his investigation of the 2-stage, and he found that CASA erred. They used the wrong document. Then they came back to me and said, oh, well, you have to have contracts. And I said, well, I have contracts. And they said, no, you don't. I said, yes, I do have contracts, and they've been provided to you previously. They said, no, you haven't. I provided evidence. Even Mr. Graham Crawford had been provided with a copy of the contract. So it was just a lot of CASA errors. Initially, the Aviation ruling, which the Ombudsman, and I advised CASA at the start, was completely the wrong document. Then it became an issue about the contracts. CASA said, now CASA's never asked any other operator to have a contract. I asked CASA, do you hold any contracts for any other operators? They don't hold any other contract. Because that was a unique requirement put onto my organisation. But I'd already preempted it because I had contracts. They'd been provided to CASA. So all of a sudden, CASA ended up with mud on their face. Then, here's another one. So I asked CASA, when a new member comes on board, how do I induct these new flying skills into the organisation? CASA advised me to use a procedure called the temporary locations procedure, which I adopted, put into my manuals. CASA approved bases under it, CASA audited, and CASA commended me on it. Then when I got the initial notification, they told me that the temporary locations procedure wasn't the approved procedure. It's like, well, you recommended it to me. I put it into my manuals on your recommendation. You audited it. You've approved bases under it. So the point is, that's my claim. It was just, I was a big critic of CASA, Senator Sterle, a big critic of CASA. Okay, before this regulatory program came in. Dr. John, I was going to say, keep away from names, but.
Well, no, because I think Chair will support me. Dr. Alec will be there, and we can ask questions of Dr. Alec, so you can use his name. And the Chair won't mind that because that's on the record. We know. Okay.
Okay. Well, Dr.
longer than me.
All right. Well, look, the CASA's regulatory program, as you're probably aware, was a decade behind schedule, hundreds of millions over budget. Before it was introduced, I argued with CASA at every conference and every opportunity I had, don't bring this in. It'll decimate the Australian-owned sector of the industry. It'll decimate flying schools in country areas. Don't bring it in. What happened? It came in, obviously, and it's had a devastating effect on the industry. So Dr. Alex, he is the man responsible for this program. He is the CASA Executive Manager of Legal, International and Regulatory Affairs. He has been there for many, many years. Many people raise allegations against him, as I said. Yeah.
So, Mr. Buckley, I'm really struggling to. So, you sat with CASA. They helped you design it. They said, "Here's the box to work in." You worked within the box. Now, and I understand that you've gone and got financial support from your dear parents. And was that because you said it was because you didn't have to do redundancies, but I'm trying to get down the path of, was there a legal avenue? Was there a dispute settlement procedure? Was there something to go, hang on, CASA, no, under my rights, I have the ability to put forth my case. Was there not any of that going on?
No, well, you'll have the opportunity. Ask Mr. Carmody or Dr. Jonathan Aviation. They asked to put forward their case in plain English with good intent to try and provide an overview of the reason for their actions.
Okay, we'll do that. But let me ask you this then. Did you seek legal advice?
I have had, look, the industry did a crowdfunding page for me of what I should do, and that's why I believe I'm fully satisfied that I have a claim of misfeasance against those individuals.
Sorry, Mr. Buckley, I'm saying, did you go and actually engage? Oh, it gives me the creeps. Did you have to go and engage a lawyer to turn good money into bad? Did that happen?
No.
Can I ask you why?
Why? So just to make sure I understand, so you're asking why I didn't go to a lawyer to pursue this matter until now?
Yeah, when it first came up, if you had, I've been around industrial relations a while, and then what they say, one thing, what happens in reality is another thing. But did you have contracts with CASA to become the overarching training provider?
Well, that was the process that I went through for the 2 years. So that was basically the intent. See, I already had bases operating under me in a somewhat similar format. It was a 2-year ground-up engineering process to actually attend to a deficiency that existed in the industry. Each of the members sought legal advice on the contract, so there's a lot of input into the contracts. But the contracts, in my opinion, aren't, I mean, CASA can bring up the contracts, but CASA have regulations. And I met every single one of the regulations. They stipulated over 600 procedures. The suite of manuals is as wider than I can go on the camera here.
Okay. All right. But going back to my original question is, why did you not go, and there's probably a very good reason, but why did you not go and seek legal support advice to say, how can I defend myself? How can I avoid not only losing my house, my parents' money, my workers have lost their job, you've lost your job, and then you said CASA came in and told Arnie Prue the day to prove that they got to give you the flick and you're 8 months and unemployed. Why didn't that happen? I'm just trying to get a clear picture.
Right, okay, because the situation, you've got to remember, as soon as CASA put those restrictions on my trade, that cost me somewhere between $10,000 to $15,000 per week. I started hemorrhaging money quickly. My parents stepped in to support the staff. There wasn't a lot of money left over. I believed that good intent would prevail, and I put complaints into the Industry Complaints Commissioner. Now, the Industry Complaints Commissioner, which will be one of the suggestions I'd like to attend to, I'd like to leave enough time. The industry about the aviation thing, which was the document that CASA initially used. The CASA Internal Industry Complaints Commissioner came back and found that it wasn't worth investigating because CASA had taken it off the table. So then I put a complaint into the Commonwealth Ombudsman, and the Commonwealth Ombudsman comes back and finds that there was a deficiency and that could have caused detriment to me. So the answer to the question is, I'm a big believer in due processes. The process is to go to the Industry Complaints Commissioner in the first thing. These things take time. Also, to me, to engage a lawyer, I've never engaged a lawyer. I've been in court on 2 occasions and haven't engaged a lawyer because once a lawyer's engaged, it's combative. It's 2 parties trying to do the other one over. I just want CASA to sit down, acknowledge that they've made a mistake, say a lot of people have been impacted by this, and return everybody affected to the situation they were in October 2018 before CASA started this process. It shouldn't need a lawyer. It should need Tony Matthews, the chair of the board, to step up and act with good intent. So,
forgive me, Mr. Buckley, but I'm no clear as to why CASA cut you off at the knees. I'm sorry to hear I had...
Yeah, there is no safety argument. You put that to them, say, what is the safety? There is... Ask them, was there any regulatory breach? Did any planes slide off a runway? Was there any allegations of unapproved maintenance or any allegations at all? Ask them that question.
It's all right. Why do you think they did it? You did touch on a certain person, CM2 to CM2, CMT2 to CMT3. Give us a bit more history on, don't mention the name, that's fine. Why would this individual go to their way to put you out of business?
Well, I think it came from higher up. I think it was, and that's why I say misfeasance. I think it comes from the highest levels in CASA. I was a critic of the regulations before they came in. I predicted what they would do to industry. They did do it to industry, so it will be somewhat of an embarrassment. I also point out that CASA introduced these new regulations. They came to me, there was 350 flight training organisations in Australia. They gave these 350 businesses 3 years to transition to the new format, Part 141, 142, or cease trading after that date. Those new regulations took away 90% of my revenue by way of the 150 air commercial pilot licence course. So my business was faced with shutting down in 3 years and a loss of revenue unless I stepped up to what was called a Part 142 organisation. The impact is I was very, very critical of CASA, and I still am critical of CASA. Let me give you an example of a brief example of a country flying school versus a city flying school, what these new regulations have done. So a country flying school will probably be in almost every single case the lower classified Part 141 school. My school, like many of the city schools, is a higher classified Part 142 school. Both the 141 school and the 142 school can deliver a commercial pilot licence. In the 141 and 142 school, they can fly to exactly the same syllabus, fly in exactly the same aircraft with exactly the same flying instructor. They do all the same CASA flight exams. They fill in the same CASA CPL test application form and go and do exactly the same flying test. The 141 school has to do the training in 200 hours. The 142 school, the higher level school like mine was, gets to do it in 150 hours. Well, it's competency-based training. How can CASA possibly mandate that the 141 school is forced into, the country school's forced into delivering a 200-hour commercial pilot licence with GST on it, when the guy down in the city, such as my business, can do a 150-hour commercial pilot licence course exempt of GST? It's the same course. It's competency-based training. Why should the guy in the country flying school have to go and fly another 50 hours before he can do a flight test, even if he meets the competency? Why would you can understand why country flying schools haven't got a snowflake's chance in hell. The people from the country will gravitate to the city to chase the more cost-effective option provided in the big city schools. It's ludicrous.
Yeah, without further ado, it does sound like you set one up for failure. Chair, there's a lot of questions I think we need to move on to pose to, without cutting off Mr. Buckley, but pose to CASA, and I'll be very interested to hear their points. But can I just, through the chair, and there's a lot of background information there, but are there any, could you simplify the questions in terms of, I'm very keen to know why they cut you off. Could you prepare something for us that way? Just a simple set of questions, Mr. Buckley, to put, with your indulgence, Chair, if you're comfortable with this, of course, make this decision, to put back to the committee that we could ask.
Certainly. Okay.
We could seek an answer.
Yes, certainly.
Look, if you part your hair the wrong way or you wore orange socks or something, you gave them the shit, so they can understand. Sorry, you upset them, I can understand that, but I'm none the clearer.
Yeah, okay. Well, nor am I. I think, look, one of the things I'd encourage Mr. Carmody down there now, Mr. Carmody spoke at the last RAT. He said that CASA very rarely gets the opportunity to publicly defend themselves. Well, here's a perfect opportunity for Mr. Carmody to publicly defend himself. And what I would ask is, I'll make a written submission on the suggestions that I have for CASA, because I realise that you're getting short of time and I don't want to. So I will make a written submission of the suggestions of how I believe CASA could be improved. Just like to say something in parting. You are aware that CASA's they did surveys of their own staff. There was a massive lack of confidence in the senior executive of the organisation. It really does need a clean out. I very formally, before the both of you today, lodged a claim with misfeasance. I believe there should be a process by the Commonwealth Ombudsman or the Attorney General's Department for that allegation to be followed through. I stand fully liable for everything I say. I'll support it with evidence. If that isn't forthcoming, I will go out to industry and I will seek industry's support. At the next federal election, I live in the seat of Chisholm, the most marginal seat, and I will run as an independent politician against the current incumbent Gladys Liu if I have to. I'm not going away, Mr. Carmody. Let me be very clear.
I just have one more question for you, Mr. Buckley. When at the very first step, when you went to the independent complaints commissioner within the department, within CASA, what were the words you used? You said that CASA had said it was off the table, or can you just tell me what that was?
Correct. So the document that CASA used, which was entirely the wrong, must have been Bring Your Kid to Work Day or something, because they used completely the wrong document. So CASA's argument was that because it was off the table, they weren't investigating. So that means that CASA could go and allege a pilot of unsafe behaviours. He tries to appeal through the Industry Complaints Commissioner. CASA realised they've balls up 2 months down the track and say, oh, we've taken it off the table and he's denied his rights. And I emphasise that the Commonwealth Ombudsman investigated the same matter, found that there was administrative deficiency, and it did cause detriment to me. And I await stage 2 of his investigation, which will include the CASA direction to my employer to terminate my employment based on the comments that I was making publicly.
I'm still intrigued about the Independent Complaints Commissioner. That person has gone and sought advice, I assume, from the legal team at CASA.
Yes.
It's a little bit circular, isn't it?
It's very, very circular. It's very circular. And that's one of my suggestions here. Mr. Carmody sits on the board of CASA, who the Industry Complaints Commissioner reports to. It's ludicrous to me, and this is one of my suggestions, is that the board, there needs to be a redesign of the board. You know, I wrote to Tony Matthews, the chair of the CASA board, for 6 months before I went public with this, completely ignored every request. raised substantive allegations against these personnel. 6 months. Had he have acted in an appropriate timeline and demonstrated good governance, I'd probably be in a very, very different situation today.
Well, Mr. Buckley, we are out of time. I'm very pleased that you have had the courage to come forward and do this. I do have some serious concerns about due process when people are pursued by CASA. I have a number of complaints of people that come before me, so I'm very concerned that we have a cultural issue that urgently needs to be addressed, but of course that's of cold comfort to you who's lost your home, that your parents are so out of pocket, and devastatingly your children have been impacted as well. So I thank you for your contribution today. I know you'll be watching the rest of the inquiry with interest.
Yes.
And this is the process of a Senate inquiry, is to try and shine lights into dark corners and some justice to issues. So thank you for your time today. Please go with our thanks.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your time. Cheers. Thank you.